Tonight, she's coming with me, not you. Deal with it. The cocky stranger standing in my kitchen looked like he had already claimed my wife. I just smiled and nodded. What he didn't realize was that my late uncle left me more than just a building. He gave me the means to ruin anyone foolish enough to cross me. By morning, this arrogant interloper would learn that some men don't get angry. They get even, in ways that linger forever. My name is Alexander Brooks. I'm 42. Until 3 months ago, I believed I had life figured out. 3 thriving fast food franchises, a beautiful wife of 18 years, and my daughter Ashley starting her sophomore year at State University. I had built it all from the ground up after leaving the Army, working 16-hour days to give my family the life they deserved. That Thursday began like any other. I was reviewing quarterly reports at the kitchen table when Sandra walked in with a man I'd never met. Tall, likely around 40, in a suit that screamed wealth. He had the smug grin men wear when they're sure they've won. "Alex," Sandra said, her voice unnaturally calm. "This is Blake Stevens." Blake stepped forward but didn't offer his hand. Instead, he leaned casually against the doorframe, as if he owned the place, one ankle over the other. His arrogance made my jaw tighten, but I remained expressionless. "She's leaving with me tonight." "Not you," Blake said, deliberately emphasizing each word. "Deal with it." I just nodded. Sandra lingered behind him, pretending to scroll her phone, but I caught her glancing at me. They were expecting an outburst, shouting, maybe even a fight. That's what weak men do. They let emotion dictate action. I set down my coffee and met Blake's eyes. "Noted," I said simply. Silence hung between us like a coiled spring. Blake's smirk faltered briefly before he forced a laugh. Sandra joined in, her laughter hollow, forced. They assumed my calm meant defeat. They had no idea they'd just declared war on the wrong man. After they left, I sat in the kitchen for 10 minutes, letting reality settle. Then I went to my home office and opened the safe hidden behind my Army photos. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the keys to my late uncle's building downtown, a property no one knew I owned. Uncle Frank left me more than just property 5 years ago. He left me insight into how the world really operates. Time to put that knowledge to work. The building stood in the old warehouse district, wedged between a tire shop and a restaurant supply store. No signs, no hours, nothing revealing what went on inside. Just the way Frank wanted it. The key turned smoothly, as if waiting for me. Inside, dust hung thick, mixed with the scent of old paper. I flicked on the lights. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed to life, casting harsh shadows across rows of filing cabinets along the walls. Frank had been what people politely called a problem solver. Companies came to him for quiet solutions, permits, zoning issues, or to convince competitors to back off. He never broke the law, but he bent it skillfully. When he died, he left me everything: the building, the files, and, most importantly, the contacts. "Knowledge is power, Alex," he used to say. "Knowing when to use it is wisdom." I opened the first cabinet. Inside were manila folders arranged by year, packed with documents, photos, handwritten notes in Frank's careful script. The tabs read like a directory of local business and politics. The second cabinet held recent files. I ran my finger along the tabs until I found what I sought: Stevens Development Group, Blake's company. Inside were permits, zoning applications, and several photos of Blake shaking hands with city council members at events. But the last document made me grin. A Better Business Bureau complaint alleging Stevens Development had used substandard materials in a low-income project. The complaint had mysteriously vanished 2 weeks later. I photographed every page with my phone, then turned to the third cabinet. This one was different: personal files, background checks, financial records, family histories. Frank always said, "You never know when someone's past might matter." I found Blake's file tucked between 2 others. It held 3-year-old bank statements showing odd cash deposits not matching reported income, photos of him in Atlantic City when he was supposedly at a Chicago business conference, and, at the bottom, a police report from 15 years ago: domestic disturbance while married to his first wife. No charges, but detailed notes. Blake had a temper, worsened by alcohol. I spent the next 2 hours photographing everything, digitizing Frank's analog lessons. By the time I secured the building and drove home, I had gathered enough material to occupy Blake for the rest of his life. Sandra thought she was upgrading. She had no clue she was hitching herself to a man with more secrets than a haunted mansion. The drive home gave me time to plan my next move. Frank always said the key to winning any battle was controlling the terrain. Blake had chosen to confront me in my own home. Now it was time to show him how wrong that decision was. By 8:30 the next morning, I was at Harold Richardson's law office. Harold had been my lawyer since I bought my first franchise, and, more importantly, he had been Uncle Frank's attorney for 20 years before that. He knew how the game was really played. "Alex," Harold said, motioning to the chair opposite his mahogany desk. "You sounded urgent on the phone." I slid a thick envelope across the desk. "I need asset protection. Everything moved into irrevocable trusts. Effective immediately." Harold opened the envelope and reviewed the documents I had prepared. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't question me. That's why I paid him what I did. "The restaurants, the house, the investments," he said, scanning the papers. "You want to move everything?" "Everything except one checking account with $5,000 that remains joint. This is comprehensive. Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Harold tapped his fingers once on the desk. "I can have the paperwork ready this afternoon. But once these trusts are in place, reversing them will be extremely difficult." Exactly the point. While Harold drafted the legal documents, I drove to my flagship restaurant. The lunch crowd was in full swing. I watched my manager, Carlos, manage the controlled chaos with military-like precision. Good people, all of them. They deserved to know their jobs were secure, no matter what Sandra did. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Dad, Mom says she's staying at Aunt Kelly's for a while." "What's happening?" I typed back. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart. Focus on your studies." But there was reason to worry. Ashley was 19, old enough to understand that her mother's visit to her sister's place wasn't temporary. She was smart enough to help if I needed her. Growing up digital, she understood technology and social media in ways that could be valuable. Another message arrived, from Sandra. "We need to talk about finances." I stared at it, then deleted it without replying. Let her sweat. By tonight, there would be no finances left to discuss. Harold called at 4 p.m. "Everything's done. The trusts are established, assets transferred. Legally, you own nothing and everything at once." "Perfect. Send copies to my accountant," I said. Harold's voice carried a caution. "Whatever you're planning, ensure it's legal." "Don't worry, Harold. I learned from the best." That evening, I sat in Uncle Frank's building reviewing more files. I discovered something about Blake's business partner, Tommy Sullivan. Tommy had gambling debts that Blake had been covering. Debts to people who didn't tolerate late payments. I photographed those records too. Insurance in case Blake got clever. My phone rang. Sandra's name appeared. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. "Alex, my cards aren't working. The bank must have made a mistake." There was no mistake. By morning, she would see how thorough my preparations were. Sandra called 6 times before 9 a.m. I sipped coffee in my downtown restaurant, watching commuters rush past the windows when she finally got through. "Alex," her voice panicked. "My cards are all declined. The bank says there's a problem." I said, taking another sip. "That's unusual. Don't play games." "What did you do?" "I protected our assets. You should probably ask Blake to cover whatever you need." Silence stretched long enough for me to notice 3 customers enter the restaurant. "This is childish, Sandra," she finally said. "No," I replied calmly. "This is strategic. Have a good day." I hung up and headed to the bank. Margaret Davis, Sandra's mother, was waiting in the lot. At 67, Maggie still carried herself like the Marine drill instructor's wife she had been for 30 years. Gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, steel blue eyes missing nothing. "Alexander," she said, falling in step beside me. "We need to talk." "Hello, Maggie. I knew you'd show eventually." Sandra called, crying about money issues. "Said you did something vindictive." I stopped walking. "Your daughter left me for another man." "Maggie, how exactly did you expect me to react?" Maggie studied my face with those hawk-like eyes. "I expected you to be the man I thought you were when I gave you my blessing to marry her." "And what kind of man is that?" I asked. "The kind who doesn't let people walk all over him." She paused. Sandra made her choice. Now she has to live with the consequences. That wasn't what I expected. You're not here to defend her. I'm here to tell you I raised her better than this. Apparently, I failed somewhere. Maggie's disappointment cut deeper than anger. "She's made her bed. Let her lie in it." Inside the bank, I completed the final transfers. The joint checking account now held exactly $5,000. Everything else had been moved to accounts Sandra couldn't touch, controlled by trustees she'd never heard of. Bank manager Jennifer Walsh handed me the final paperwork with a practiced smile. "Is there anything else you need today, Mr. Brooks?" "Just one thing. If my wife comes asking about these accounts, refer her to my attorney." Of course. Back at my office, Ashley waited in the parking lot. My daughter looked older than 19. Stress had added a hardness to her face that tightened my chest. "Dad," she said, "I know what Mom did. I saw Blake's posts. Him and Mom holding hands at restaurants. It's all over his Instagram." Anger in her voice reminded me of her grandmother. "How long has this been going on? Does it matter?" "It matters to me. She lied to both of us." I pulled out my phone and showed her Tony Blackwood's business card. "If you want to help make sure the truth comes out, call this number. Tell them you're my daughter and that you have social media evidence." Ashley took the card, eyes lighting with purpose. "What kind of information?" "The kind that proves Blake Stevens isn't the successful businessman he pretends to be." Ashley proved more resourceful than I'd expected. She spent 3 days compiling Blake's online trail, screenshots of posts cross-referenced with public records. Her generation understood digital footprints in ways mine never would. "Dad, look at this," she said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. Blake posted these Vegas photos, but his filings say he was at a construction conference in Denver. The photos showed Blake at blackjack tables, upscale restaurants, and hotel pools, timestamped the same weekend his company claimed conference expenses as deductions. "That's fraud," I said. "It gets worse." I found his ex-wife's social post complaining about missed child support payments on the same dates he was gambling in Vegas. I studied Ashley's evidence. Blake Stevens wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a deadbeat father and a tax cheat. But I needed something immediate, something to rattle him to the core. That evening I returned to Uncle Frank's building. In the deepest cabinet I found what I wanted: surveillance photos from 15 years ago, Blake outside a motel with a woman who wasn't his first wife. The photos were dated, time-stamped, and notarized by a private investigator Frank had used. I scanned everything and drove to an all-night print shop across town. 2 hours later, I had a complete dossier: financial irregularities, tax fraud evidence, child support violations, and the surveillance photos. Everything bound with a single note: some decisions have consequences. At 3 a.m., I drove to Blake's modern glass tower, impressive on the outside, hollow within. I found his unit on the lobby directory, took the elevator to the 15th floor, and walked down a quiet hallway lit by humming fluorescents. I left the package propped against his door so he couldn't miss it when he left for work. Walking back to the car, I felt a sense of closure. Blake had declared war in my kitchen, thinking he'd picked on a weak man. He was about to learn a lesson. Some battles are already won before the enemy knows they're fighting. My phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. "We need to talk about this money situation." I deleted it unread. By morning, she and Blake would have bigger problems than money. The package would be his wake-up call. Everything he thought was secure was about to become uncertain. I drove home through empty streets, already plotting my next move. Blake had taken something that belonged to me. Now I would take everything that belonged to him. Blake called at 6:47 a.m. I was drinking coffee in the same kitchen where he'd given his ultimatum when my phone rang. Seeing his name on the display made me smile. "Alex." His voice was strained, none of the cockiness from 3 days ago. "We need to talk about what?" "Don't play games. I know this came from you." I took another sip of coffee. "I'm not sure what you mean, Blake. The package, the photos, all of it? I still don't understand." There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background, probably Blake calling from his car after discovering my little gift. "Look," he said, voice dropping to a whisper, "maybe we can work something out. Maybe Sandra and I moved too fast. That's between you and Sandra. Alex, please. Some of the things in that package could ruin me." "Then you should have thought about that before leaning against my kitchen doorframe and telling me to deal with it." I hung up and immediately called Harold Richardson. "Harold, I need you to buy a specific property today." "What property?" "The building that houses Stevens Development Group. It's owned by Riverside Properties, LLC. Make them an offer they can't refuse." "Alex, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to become Blake Stevens' landlord." 2 hours later, Harold called back. "Done." Riverside Properties was more than happy to sell. They've apparently been trying to unload that building for months. Perfect. Send Blake Stevens a 30-day notice to vacate. Market rate rent increases start immediately. How much of an increase? Triple the current rate. Harold, everything I'm doing is completely legal. Blake can pay the new rent or find new offices. By noon, Ashley called with an update. Dad, Blake has been trying to reach Mom all morning. She's not answering. Where is she? Still at Aunt Kelly's. But Kelly called Grandma Maggie, and Maggie called me. Mom's been crying all morning. Why? Blake told her about some financial trouble. Something about his business being in danger. I smiled. The package had worked exactly as intended. Blake was beginning to realize his problems had just started. That afternoon, Blake appeared at my restaurant. He looked sleepless, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident demeanor replaced with desperation. Alex, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. We need to talk. I'm listening. That building purchase, the rent increase, the package, all of it. Stop now, or I go to the police and tell them what? That someone sent you evidence of your own illegal activities. Blake went pale as the truth sank in. He came to threaten me, but now he realized he was the one at risk. What do you want? He asked finally. I leaned back. I want you gone. Take your business, take your problems, and get out of my city. If I don't get that, the next package goes to the IRS, the state attorney general, and your ex-wife's lawyer. Blake sat stunned as the weight of his situation settled in. He thought he was taking my wife. Instead, he'd handed me the tools to destroy his life. Sandra returned on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports. She looked smaller somehow, designer clothes hanging loose as if bought for someone else. The armor of confidence she had worn 3 weeks ago was gone, leaving someone I barely recognized. Alex, she said from the kitchen doorway. We need to talk. I didn't look up from my papers. About what? Fixing this mess? Which mess? Your affair with Blake Stevens or your financial choices? She stepped in, heels clicking on the hardwood. Blake's gone. He left town yesterday. You heard? Alex, you orchestrated all this. The building purchase, the rent increase, everything. I finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup intact, but unable to hide her exhaustion. I didn't orchestrate anything, I said calmly. I simply stopped shielding you from the consequences of your choices. Those files, the photos, the financial records, that was you. Blake made enemies long before he met you. I just made sure they knew where to find him. She pulled out a chair, sitting uninvited. I made a mistake. A terrible one. But we can fix this. Can't we? Blake was lying about everything. Business, finances, past. You didn't know because you didn't want to. You were too busy enjoying his attention to ask the right questions. Sandra's voice hardened. So, you're punishing me forever? I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself from repeating the same mistake. What mistake? Trusting you. The words hung between us like smoke. Sandra's expression cycled through shock, anger, hurt, and finally resignation. Alex, I know I hurt you, but 18 years of marriage has to count for something. It did. Past tense. What about Ashley? What about our family? Ashley understands consequences. She also understands that her mother chose to destroy this family for a man who turned out to be a fraud. Sandra stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You can't just erase 18 years. Watch me. That evening, Ashley called while I was having dinner at my downtown restaurant. Dad, Mom came by my apartment crying. She wants me to convince you to take her back. What did you tell her? I told her she made her choice when she decided Blake Stevens was more important than her family. Good girl. Dad, I have to ask, are you really okay? I looked around the restaurant I had built from nothing, watched my staff serving customers with pride and precision, and felt the satisfaction of something earned through hard work. I'm better than I've been in months, sweetheart. Thursday morning, Harold Richardson called with news I'd been expecting. Blake Stevens filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Stevens Development Group was officially liquidated. What about his personal assets? Gone. The house is in foreclosure, his car's repossessed, and he's facing multiple creditor lawsuits. And Sandra? She filed preliminary divorce papers. Her attorney wants to negotiate. Tell her attorney everything goes through you. No direct contact. I hung up and drove to Ashley's apartment near the university. She was waiting with coffee and a laptop full of research on Blake's business collapse. Dad, look at this, she said, showing news articles from the local business journal. Blake's company defaulted on 6 construction loans. Banks seized all active projects. What about his employees? Most found new jobs. Turns out Blake hadn't been paying into their retirement accounts for months. Any idea where he went? Sarah heard he's doing day labor construction in Arizona, minimum wage. The irony wasn't lost on me. Blake Stevens tried to steal my wife and lost everything he'd built over 15 years. Meanwhile, my restaurants thrived, my assets were secure, and my family, what mattered most, was stronger than ever. That afternoon, Maggie Davis called. "Alexander, I wanted to thank you." "For what, Maggie?" "For showing Sandra what real strength looks like. She spent years thinking she could manipulate situations without consequences. You taught her otherwise. I didn't do it to educate her. Maybe not, but she needed the lesson. She's staying with her sister Kelly indefinitely, probably for the best." That weekend, Ashley and I drove to the lake house Sandra had always disliked for being too rustic. We spent the day fishing, discussing post-graduation plans, and enjoying the quiet that had been impossible with Sandra around. "Dad," Ashley said, watching the sunset over the water, "I'm proud of how you handled everything." "How's that? You didn't get angry. You didn't lose control. You just handled it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being better than those who wronged you." Is that what this was? Revenge? I thought for a long moment, watching the lake reflect the orange and pink sky. No, sweetheart. This was self-preservation. Monday morning brought a call from Sandra's divorce attorney requesting a settlement conference. I told Harold to schedule it for the following week. "What's your bottom line?" Harold asked. "She gets only what she brought into the marriage 18 years ago. Nothing more, nothing less." "That's harsh, Alex." "It's fair. She gambled with our marriage. She lost. Now she pays the price." 3 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Sandra kept her car, personal belongings, and a small settlement to cover basic living expenses for about 2 years. Everything else, restaurants, house, investments, remained in trusts she couldn't touch. I never saw Blake Stevens again, but through business contacts, I heard he'd taken a roofing job in Phoenix, starting over at 43 with nothing but the clothes on his back. Sometimes I wondered if Sandra regretted her choice. Then I remembered her expression when she had stood behind Blake in my kitchen, watching my reaction to his ultimatum. She made her choice. Now she could live with it. 1 year after Blake Stevens slunk out of town, I opened my 4th restaurant. The grand opening was everything I'd hoped for. Packed house, local news coverage, and a waiting list for tables stretching 2 weeks ahead. Ashley helped coordinate the catering staff between her business school classes. She had decided to study restaurant management, inspired by how I had built something lasting from nothing. "Dad," she said during a quiet moment, "remember when Mom used to complain that you worked too much?" I remember a lot of things your mother complained about. She never understood that this wasn't just work, it was building something. Some people notice the hours, others see the empire. Maggie Davis attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, dressed in her finest and carrying herself with the poise of someone who chose the right side when the lines were drawn. "Alexander," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "your Uncle Frank would be proud." "Think so. He taught me well. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply outlasting your adversaries." The local business journal ran a feature on my expansion, showing how I'd grown from 3 to 4 locations in just 18 months. Several long-term employees spoke about job security, career growth, and the family-like environment I fostered. "Brooks knows taking care of his people is the foundation of success," said Carlos, my first manager, now overseeing all 4 locations. The article mentioned my recent divorce only briefly, noting that I had successfully navigated personal challenges while continuing to expand my business empire. Sandra's name was not mentioned, no details shared. Just a simple acknowledgement that life had thrown me a curveball, and I'd hit it out of the park. That evening, Ashley and I celebrated at the lake house. We grilled steaks, opened a special bottle of wine, and watched the sunset paint the water in hues of gold and crimson. "Have you heard anything about Mom?" Ashley asked, sitting on the dock with her feet in the water. "Not directly. Harold mentioned she's working as a bookkeeper for a small firm. Do you miss her?" I thought about it. Did I miss the woman who had stood in my kitchen 18 months ago, watching another man deliver an ultimatum? Or did I miss who she had been before ambition and discontent turned her into someone unrecognizable? "I miss who she was 20 years ago," I said finally. But that person disappeared long before Blake Stevens appeared. Do you think you'll ever marry again? Maybe. But if I do, it will be to someone who knows that partnership is about building together, not tearing it down for fleeting thrills. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the dock. A loon called to its mate across the lake, the sound echoing like a promise. 18 months later, I stood in the offices of Brooks Restaurant Group, reviewing plans for restaurant number 7. What began as a survival strategy during my divorce had grown into a regional dining empire, employing over 200 people. Ashley walked in with 2 cups of coffee and a confident smile. She had graduated business school the previous spring and was now my director of operations, overseeing staff training, supply chains, and day-to-day management. The Denver location is ahead of schedule, she reported, taking a seat across from me. Grand opening next month. Any problems with permits or inspections? Nothing we can't handle. I learned from the best. Through my office window, I watched the city where I had built my life, lost my marriage, and discovered my purpose. Everything looked different, not because the city changed, but because I had. I was no longer the man who had sat in his kitchen 18 months ago, silently accepting another man's ultimatum. Dad, Ashley said, breaking my thoughts, I have news. Good or bad? Good. I'm engaged. I looked at my 21-year-old daughter, confident, capable, ready to face the world. To who? Michael Torres. He's an engineer. Graduated last year. You've met him twice. The tall guy with a firm handshake and steady gaze. When's the wedding? Next fall. Small, just family and close friends. I thought about walking Ashley down the aisle, about the man she had chosen. Michael Torres was nothing like Blake Stevens, steady where Blake was flashy, honest where Blake was deceitful, a builder where Blake was a taker. Does Mom know? I told her yesterday. She cried. Happy or sad tears? Both. I think she's happy for me, but sad she won't help plan the wedding the way she imagined. That was her choice. That evening, I drove past Blake Stevens' former office building. It now housed a thriving architectural firm run by people who paid rent on time and treated employees with respect. The city was better without him. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold Richardson. Final divorce settlement completed, all legal obligations fulfilled. I deleted the message and kept driving. Sandra was officially in my past, a closed chapter in a story still being written. She retained her dignity and basic security, but had lost everything that truly mattered. Family, stability, and the life we had built together. 6 weeks later, I walked Ashley down the aisle to marry Michael Torres. The ceremony was elegant but not ostentatious, meaningful without being overdone. As I placed her hand in Michael's, I saw in his eyes the same determination I had at his age, the same commitment to building something lasting. Later, during the father-daughter dance, Ashley whispered, "Thank you for showing me what true strength looks like." What do you mean? I asked. You could have fallen apart when Mom left. Instead, you built something better. Looking around at friends, family, and employees who had become family, I realized she was right. Blake Stevens had thought he was taking something from me. But in truth, he had given me the motivation to become the man I was always meant to be.